Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Think of Spain and you may imagine sand, sea and sangria, but it is a country becoming drier by the day, with predictions that 20,000 people a year could die because of rising temperatures. And so Spain says it's aiming to be a circular economy within 30 years to fight climate change. Everything that's used is used again. No waste. Is it possible? Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. It's not a new idea, but it is bold for a country to say we will do it. So what are the difficulties? And will other governments take up the challenge? Last month, the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, announced that his country aims to have what is known as a circular economy by 2050. It's expected that Spain will face droughts in 70% of its territory by then, according to government reports. Many experts say we need a fundamental shift in the global approach to climate change if we are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero. One idea is to move away from the so-called take, make, waste model of consumption and move to a circular economy where materials are reused, renewed and resold. But just how easy will it be? Is a circular economy achievable within a generation? Let's get the conversation going. We welcome back to the Roundtable Professor Karl Williams, Director of the Centre for Waste Management at the University of Central Lancashire. We say hello to Matthew Agarwala, Economist at the Bennett Institute for Public Policy at the University of Cambridge. And lastly, we welcome Robin Osterley, Chief Executive of the Charity Retail Association. Matthew, I'm going to come to you first of all because you said to one of our producers, you are an optimist, but on condition. So what are your reservations about this?
Well, I think we have to understand the difference between complacent optimism and conditional optimism. And complacent is the kind of stuff, you're a kid waiting for your birthday present. You're going to be happy no matter what. But conditional optimism is what was required in order to understand how our economy can go forward in a sustainable manner. And if we do the right things, if we make the investments up front to decarbonize, if we develop the new business models that can link waste outputs from one production process to inputs into the next production process, so that we put as little as possible into landfill, if we do that hard work, then we can actually deliver a more sustainable, high growth, high productivity economy.
And other than countries such as Spain, are you seeing this happening?
There's huge interest in achieving this all around the world. In London, for instance, we have businesses, huge office buildings, and what they've decided to do is, rather than pay for electricity and heating through the normal system, they're going out to restaurants in the city and collecting the waste cooking oil, which would otherwise be thrown out and need to be disposed of. But now it's being used in an incinerator to power the building. And so there are ways to do this, but the problem is that these examples are still too few and too far between, but there's hope.
We're going to take a look now at a little bit from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation promotional video about the circular economy idea. This is just a clip.
So what about the washing machines, mobile phones, fridges? We know they don't biodegrade. Here, we're talking about another sort of rethink, a way to cycle valuable metals, polymers and alloys so they maintain their quality and continue to be useful beyond the shelf life of individual products. What if the goods of today became the resources of tomorrow? It makes commercial sense. Instead of the throw away and replace culture we've become used to, we'd adopt a return and renew one, where products and components are designed to be disassembled and regenerated. One solution may be to rethink the way we view ownership. What if we never actually owned our technologies? We simply licensed them from the manufacturers.
So, Karl, it's laid out in a very simple manner there, but it isn't anything like as straightforward as that, is it?
No, it's much more complicated than that. I mean, we're all very familiar with recycling, and we're used to recycling products into secondary materials. The whole concept around circular economy is that we get maximum value from the product or resource as it is. So we look at reusing products or repurposing products rather than just thinking we can recycle them. And if we are serious about the circular economy, then we need to change how we view products and resources.
Well, this is a good point to bring you in, Robin, because reusing rather than recycling is the job of the charity shop sector, isn't it? And do you think you've been leading the way, or are there things that you could and should do better?
Bit of both, probably. Certainly, charity shops have been around for a long time, and they have been making an incredible contribution to reuse. And as was just said, reuse is in a sense almost the forgotten aspect of this, because extracting the maximum value particularly out of clothing, is crucially important. And from my point of view, I think it shouldn't just be left to sort of entrepreneurs to do this. There should be some kind of command going on, whether that's carrot or stick, or more likely actually a combination of both. It should be really crucial for people to concentrate on reuse. I mean, I think it's quite scandalous, actually, that local authorities have recycling targets at the moment, which are very substantial and which they're striving very heavily to meet, but they don't have any targets at all for reuse. And in fact, it's obviously very difficult to measure reuse. So I think you're absolutely right that reuse is a crucial part. And certainly charity shops have recognised this for the last, 50 years, and have been playing a very significant part. If it wasn't for what charity shops do, probably the amount of textiles going into landfill would be doubled, actually. So they are leading the way, but of course nobody's complacent about this, and there's always more that could be done.
Yeah, Karl, back to you on this one, because I mentioned at the top of the programme that it's not necessarily a new idea, but in fact it is a fairly new phenomenon, that we are not reusing things. Because in my grandfather and grandmother's day, and going back before that, even in my parents' day, you would have made, do and mended. So where have we gone?
I think it's our relationship with products is the biggest driver. I mean, I'm quite old. I remember back in the 70s, people used to rent things, and we're starting to see more people suggesting that we shouldn't own cars, we shouldn't own televisions, we shouldn't own electronics, because by renting them, it allows us then to upgrade and for them to have second use and be rented on to other people. At the moment, we're in a very much a consumer society where we're encouraged to get a new phone and throw the old phone away, upgrade our TV, throw the TV away.
I'm going to come to the phones in just a minute, because it's a bit of a bugbear with me. But back to you, Matthew. We have to be bold, you say. In what way?
Well, I think actually one of the ways we have to be bold is changing, exactly as we were talking about, the way that we view ownership of products. Right now, if you think of the economic problem here, it's a collective action issue. We need to get 8 billion consumers to work together to try to reduce our ecological footprint and become more sustainable as an economy. But we also need to grow the economy for the half of the world's population that really suffers on sort of less than subsistence incomes, right? And so what we need is some bold leadership to show us that we can be just as happy, we can have the same living standard, but without owning so many items. And that instead of us owning 8 billion consumers, we could have this far smaller number of, for instance, big tech companies still owning the phones and the computers. And then all we have to do is target them. There's only about 50 big tech companies that we really have to deal with. We could target them on decommissioning the products at the end of their lifespan.
Okay, talking about talking about big tech companies. Here I've got my mobile phone in my hand. I would expect to just change it for another one when this falls apart after, 2 years or so on, and then upgrade to another one. Why is it that companies, Robin, this is just a personal opinion, okay, Matthew, you got your hand up. Why is it that companies want you to throw things away? Why do they want you to ditch it?
Okay, I'll come to that, but first, you said after 2 years, and I want to know why you said 2 and not 3 and not 1 and not 4. But one of the reasons that we end up tossing our phones every couple of years is because of something called planned obsolescence. It's a design feature of the product that it will become obsolescent within a couple of years. It's a deliberate design feature. And it's not just telephones, it's washing machines, it's cars, it's software packages. It's deliberate in order to try to drive more sales into the future.
Okay, now I do get that. And when I said 2 years, I just plucked it out of the air. I think I've had this one for 5 years now. But my question to you, Robin, this is not so much to do with the retail sector, charity retail sector, as just somebody who's involved in thinking ahead, is how do you get companies when, as Matthew says, built-in obsolescence exists and has existed since I started buying stuff for myself? How do you get them to change their mindsets?
I do think it has to be a combination of carrot and stick. So I think there have to be governmental strictures about this. I think the government has to be clear that this cannot go on in this way. I mean, we've talked about mobile phones. Mobile phones is a very, very obvious example. A less obvious example, of course, is clothing. There's been recent developments in terms of fast fashion where people are starting to treat clothing, because it's been so cheap to purchase new clothing, they've started to treat it effectively as disposable items. Well, the government is now considering a system called producer responsibility, extended producer responsibility, EPR. And the idea here is that there will be essentially a levy on clothing manufacture, and to the extent that clothing that is manufactured is sustainable and is able to last longer, that levy will be smaller. So there will be both a mixture of carrot and stick on clothing manufacturers. And it seems to me that we can't expect capitalist organizations, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, I mean, we can't expect profit-making organizations to shoot themselves in the foot by making stuff that is actually more sustainable, because that's when the built-in obsolescence comes. So we're going to have to do this to an extent from the top down, as well as having it demanded by the consumer. The government must intervene, I think.
Okay, well, let's put up on screen an example, or a few examples of companies that have decided that they want to be part of the new circular economy. You mentioned retail, H&M, using food waste to make clothes. Now, that's extraordinary, really, isn't it? Renault, car company, recycling electrical vehicle batteries. Nike, again, clothing. Footwear from factory waste. And IKEA, or IKEA, depending on how you care to pronounce it, buying up used furniture. My question still is, and this is for you now, Karl, how can companies like that say this is what we want to do, when companies like the one that make my mobile phone and other big companies won't do it at the moment? How do you change their minds?
I think the way forward has already been mentioned, which is extended producer responsibility. That's driving a lot of the environmental change within the waste management sector. And the other thing is that businesses need to see that a different business model works just as effectively as a model in which they sell products to you. So if you're producing televisions or washing machines, you need to see that the repair market, which is mainly done by charity groups at the moment, is a viable business model. So it's changing how businesses view their commercial sector. So rather than just endlessly producing new products that we constantly buy, they will produce products that we will then keep for longer, and they will provide us with a service to keep them going. So similar to a car. We buy a car, we keep it for 10 years, but we pay for servicing to keep it going. And the same sort of thing has to be done for
Matthew, I'm not ignoring you.
Clothes.
I'm not ignoring you, but I'm going to go, since the charity sector was mentioned, I'm going to go back to Robin at this point. So are there ways that your side of the business can teach other people how best to do things, as mentioned by Karl just then?
Yeah, I mean, Carl's dead right. There is a very significant sector in terms of upcycling that is going on within charities, particularly in furniture, because there's an obvious massive saving that can be made there, but also in clothing and textiles and other things as well, enhancing the reuse aspects of those items. So we have been at it a while, actually, as you mentioned right at the beginning. We have been at it a while, and we will continue to do so because it's showing quite clearly that there is profit to be made there. And if charities can be entrepreneurial, well, why can't commercial businesses? Of course they can.
Okay, Matthew, what about the idea that you have to start at the very beginning in terms of making something reusable rather than waiting until it's finished its life and then seeing if it possibly could be reused? You have to change your mindset here.
It's a completely different change of mindset. And that's something that needs to start right at the beginning, at the drawing board with the engineers in the room, so that we can start designing products that can be taken apart and the pieces can be reused or recycled. But of course, whenever we're talking about recycling, we have to remember that it's most effective and most efficient as far upstream, as early on in the production process as possible. So when we are looking at how we design these household products, we need to ensure that the entire production system, right from the raw materials all the way through to the end product, is as circular as possible, putting as little as possible into landfill. There's a huge opportunity here as well, which is for new firms, new services to be created in the business sector in order to link up the end of one production process to the beginning of the next. It's a brokerage service.
Well, and so if a government then supported them in doing that, imagine the potential, because they could see it as a good business model, not just something to help with the future of the planet.
I completely agree. I think early business support to bring these brokerage firms out of the woodwork, to create them, that would be really useful.
Karl, what do you make of, oh, you're looking a bit skeptical, but what do you make of Spain's idea? Do you think it's a possibility?
I think it's really, really good that countries are ambitious. I think we need leadership and ambition and a way forward. I think Spain has got a big challenge because countries are not in isolation. And if you think about what Matthew was talking about, the infrastructure and the brokerage, to have a circular economy and to go for net zero, you need to have those links. And most links and manufacturing are outside of countries. So you need to have countries working together, even on a global scale. So it's really good what Spain are doing, but I think Spain will struggle because they don't have everything that's required within their country boundaries.
Yeah, and it's a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? It's the supply line. If you can't go out and get somebody to help you to do the thing that you want to do, then it's going to be very difficult. And they won't be setting that sort of idea up because nobody else in their country is doing it. What do you make of Spain's idea, Robin?
I mean, I think it's fantastic that any country should aspire to net zero. I mean, we're aspiring to net zero. A lot of this is about timescale. Everyone understands, well, perhaps not everyone, but an enormous number of people understand the extent to which this is absolutely critical. You know, you only have to walk into any bookshop and find a book on climate change, start reading it, and you would be absolutely terrified. And these issues are completely crucial to the survival of the planet. We've just come through, well, just going through an extraordinary pandemic. That is going to be as nothing compared to the issues associated with climate change. And if we don't get to grips with it, but what nobody seems to understand is the timescales to which we need to be working. If we don't start doing some of this stuff now, it just gets more and more difficult over time. So saying, oh, we're going to be net zero in 50 years' time, well, maybe we won't have a planet in 50 years' time.
Well, it's not even 50, is it? Because they're talking about 2050. It's 29 years away. So it's not very long at all. Have a think about this while I read something out. I'm going to come back to you and say, apart from the carrot and stick, which you've already mentioned, what are the three biggest things that need to be conquered to get global acceptance of this kind of idea? And I'm going to read this from the greeneconomycoalition.org. So far, the idea has been championed and is now perceived by many as almost a magical solution, a more or less straightforward approach to tackle the global ecological crises. What seems to be forgotten is that for complex problems, Simple solutions do not work. Consequently, the risk of disappointment is high. Karl, if we are to avoid that kind of disappointment, what obstacle number one would you say needs to be cleared out of the way?
Climate literacy, I think, is a number one obstacle, so that everybody understands exactly what climate change and the climate impacts mean. And I think because everybody's not clear on what the impacts of climate change or actually understanding it, that is a big barrier.
But do you think it's now understood that it is happening as opposed to the vast majority of people either being unsure or skeptical, as it was maybe 20 years ago?
I think the majority of people understand that it's happening, but they don't understand what the implications are. What does it mean for them? It's good to watch TV programs and see it happening around the world, but people don't really relate it to their lifestyle and how they live and what it's going to mean to living in their particular country.
Matthew, you're number two on this one.
I think it's correcting the perverse incentives that we've created throughout the local and global economy. We subsidize fossil fuels. That's got to stop. We don't reflect the value of nature in our agricultural systems. That's got to stop. We ignore how important clean air is to labor productivity and to human health and to human well-being, and that's got to stop. Our economic incentives need to be aligned with the goals that we're setting for ourselves at big political events.
Robin, your turn, if it hasn't already been covered.
Yeah, not easy. I think those two contributions cover it just about. The only thing I would probably say is education, actually, which is almost the same as Karl's description, but I'd take it at a lower level. I think we should be teaching this in primary school, and we certainly should be teaching it in secondary school. I think that once the pressure comes on from the kids, then things might start to happen much more effectively. I remember my son, when he was 16, coming to me and saying, "What sort of planet are you leaving us with, Dad?" And I was thinking, well, it's not entirely my fault, but he was absolutely outraged, and it's that kind of motion for change that I think could make a difference eventually. But we have to get to grips with it.
But isn't this the crux of it? For the last, I'm going to guess and say 65, 70 years, probably since the end of the Second World War, we have been innovating so much, we haven't thought about anybody else and their inheritance of this planet. We have been the most selfish generation that mankind has ever known. And it's the children, as you say, Robin, who now might be pushing that change. Is that what you see, Karl, in your work, that it's the young people who are saying this is the sort of thing of the circular economy that we must have?
Yes, I am. I'm seeing it amongst my students. I'm seeing it amongst secondary school children. They're starting to see that our generation are leaving them this legacy without providing any solution or any clear direction of what's happening to the planet. And they can see the impact, and also they're going to be the ones that are going to have to deal with it, and they're the ones that are going to have to find the solutions for it.
Matthew, you're an economist. Is this the answer, or is it too late?
I take a different view. I don't want to blame the previous generations. I'm grateful for the Civil Rights Act. I'm grateful for women in the workplace, and I'm grateful for the democratic and legal freedoms that we have. This is our generation's task too, and this is the one we're going to have to address. Circular economy is a huge part of it, but so too is getting the incentives right across all sectors of the economy.
And are you seeing that beginning to happen?
There are pockets of optimism.
Well, that's better than that. That's the glass not quite half full, but it's just a little bit on the frothy side.
The capacity for renewables energy generation has exploded. The price of renewable energy has crashed. The price of battery storage has crashed over the past decade. These are really important and impressive accomplishments. We just need to keep going.
Robin, your 16-year-old came to you. I don't know how old he is now. Does he think people like you are making a difference now in the right way?
Probably not enough. I would say I can bring him in and ask him if you like, but probably not enough. I think he would seriously doubt that we are doing enough about this. I think he, as Karl says, I think he thinks we've left him a mess. I'm not quite sure which generation Matthew is referring to. I'm talking about our current generation.
I think he was too.
Now,
yeah.
Leaving people as leaving a mess behind. And I think that is largely what is happening. And it seems a bit unfortunate that he's going to have to pick up the pieces. But then on the other hand, the youngsters have got more energy and they are more perhaps flexible in the way that they think. So perhaps they stand a better chance of doing it. I think you are absolutely right. We have been the most selfish generation that has ever been on the planet for all sorts of reasons, possibly due to the war and privations and all of that kind of stuff. And our parents showered on us everything that they possibly could because they wanted us to lead a better life than they did. And we've taken advantage of that. And we've, in so doing, we've spent a lot of the planet, and we need to recover from that. And perhaps we're going to have to leave it to the next generations to do so.
Thanks ever so much to all three of you. I suppose a circular economy means it is a perfect world, and a perfect world is something you may dream of, but is highly unlikely to ever happen. Let's just hope you get as close as you possibly can to it. Listen, thank you, Karl. Thank you, Matthew. Robin, good to have you on the programme. Very much appreciated wherever you happen to be picking up this edition of Roundtable. We will be back very soon, but for now, that's all the time we have for this show. From me, David Foster, from the team. Until next time, goodbye.